somewhere at the bottom of a perfectly ordinary ocean, in water so cold it sits just above freezing and so dark that no light from the surface has touched it in perhaps 1,000 years, there lives an animal with the most misleading name in the entire history of biology. Its scientific name translates word for word from Latin as vampire squid from hell. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual official name that scientists chose and agreed upon and published in an academic journal in 1903, and nobody has changed it since. The animal behind that name does not drink blood. It has never once in its long evolutionary history harmed a single living creature with any kind of aggression. It spends most of its life hovering completely still in absolute darkness, eating things that are already dead. And yet, the more you actually learn about this animal, the more you realize it does not need any of those things to justify that name. What it actually does is far stranger than anything a vampire ever managed. Let us start with the most fundamental question, because the vampire squid is not actually a squid. It is also not an octopus. It sits alone in its own separate order of the animal kingdom, a group called Vampiromorphidae, and right now the vampire squid is the only living species in that entire order. It is the last of its kind. Every other member of its lineage has been extinct for millions of years, and it alone survived. Scientists call animals like this a phylogenetic relict. That phrase means an organism that represents an ancient evolutionary branch that has otherwise vanished from the earth. In simpler terms, the vampire squid is the sole survivor of a group that once had many more members, all of which disappeared while this one species quietly kept going, adapting, descending deeper, and thriving in a part of the ocean where almost nothing else could follow. The lineage itself is ancient beyond easy comprehension. Fossil evidence from 2024 describes a relative called Simoniteuthis michaeli from the early Jurassic period of Luxembourg, suggesting that vampiromorphs were alive and hunting in shallower seas well over 175 million years ago. Over millions of years, as the group declined above and competition increased, the ancestors of the modern vampire squid made a very deliberate evolutionary retreat. They went down, deeper and deeper into the ocean, away from light and competitors and predators, see until they found a zone of the sea that almost nothing else could tolerate. Physically, the vampire squid sits between octopuses and squids without being fully either one. Like an octopus, it has 8 arms, but like a squid, it has a mantle and fins. It has 2 additional retractile filaments that are found in no other living cephalopod. These filaments can extend to lengths far greater than the animal's own body, and then retract completely into small pockets within its webbing, essentially disappearing from view. The animal grows to a maximum length of around 28 centimeters, roughly the length of a standard ruler. Its body is dark reddish-brown, described by researchers as velvety in texture. Between its 8 arms stretches a wide web of skin that gives it the appearance of wearing a cloak, and it was this cloak, combined with its coloring and its red eyes, that inspired its dramatic name when German zoologist Carl Chun first described it in 1903. And he was going for atmosphere. He was not wrong about the look. To understand the vampire squid fully, you have to understand the specific layer of ocean it calls home, because this is not just any part of the deep sea. The vampire squid does not simply live deep. It lives in a place called the oxygen minimum zone, and that specific address changes everything about how this animal was built, what it eats, how it defends itself, and why it has survived for so long when everything around it has not. The oxygen minimum zone is a band of ocean water found at depths ranging from roughly 600 to 900 meters in most tropical and subtropical seas. At this depth, sunlight has long since disappeared. The temperature of the water sits between 2 and 6 degrees Celsius, which is just barely above freezing. Pressure at these depths is between 60 and 90 times greater than what you experience standing at sea level, and the oxygen concentration is catastrophically low, at sometimes sitting at oxygen saturation levels of only 3%. To frame that number properly, normal ocean surface water carries dissolved oxygen at roughly 6 to 8 milliliters per liter. The oxygen minimum zone often contains 0.22 milliliters per liter or less. That is a reduction of more than 95%. The reason for this is biological. Organic matter sinking from the sunlit surface layers above is consumed by bacteria as it descends. Those bacteria use up the available oxygen faster than deep water circulation can replenish it. For almost every complex animal, this environment is simply incompatible with survival. Large fish cannot function here. The apex predators that dominate other depths cannot operate in water this starved of oxygen. They require far too much of it to run their bodies, and the oxygen minimum zone simply cannot provide that. This is precisely why the vampire squid has not been replaced or outcompeted in hundreds of millions of years. It did not just adapt to the worst neighborhood in the ocean. It turned that neighborhood into a fortress. The conditions that exclude every predator powerful enough to threaten it are the same conditions the vampire squid has learned to thrive within. It is not surviving there despite the harshness. It is surviving there because of it. The oxygen minimum zone is not its prison. It is its protection. Building a body capable of living in those conditions required the vampire squid to solve several engineering problems simultaneously, and the solutions it arrived at are among the most unusual in any animal on the planet. The first problem was oxygen transport. Most complex animals use hemoglobin to carry oxygen through the blood, and hemoglobin gives blood its red color. The vampire squid does not use hemoglobin. It uses hemocyanin, copper-based protein that performs the same function but does it more efficiently at extremely low oxygen concentrations. Hemocyanin does not bind oxygen as powerfully as hemoglobin under normal conditions, but in environments where oxygen is desperately scarce, it is actually superior. It can grip and hold whatever tiny amount of oxygen is available with far greater tenacity. The presence of hemocyanin in the blood is also what gives the vampire squid its blue blood, not as a metaphor, but as a biological, literal fact. Its blood is blue. The second problem was energy. Moving through water requires energy, and energy requires oxygen, which is exactly what this animal does not have in abundance. The vampire squid responded by reducing its metabolic rate to the lowest of any known cephalopod. It needs to consume very little oxygen because it does very little. It does not chase prey. It does not sprint away from predators. It drifts, or almost completely motionless for long periods, using barely perceptible movements of its two small fins to maintain position. Its body is gelatinous and neutral in buoyancy, meaning it neither sinks nor rises without effort. The tissues of its body contain ammonium-rich fluids that match the density of the surrounding seawater so closely that maintaining depth costs it almost nothing. The third problem was vision. Total darkness might seem to make eyes pointless, but bioluminescence is everywhere in the deep sea, produced by the animals themselves. Detecting it requires eyes of extraordinary sensitivity. The vampire squid has proportionally the largest eyes of any animal on Earth relative to its body size. Each eye can measure up to 2.5 centimeters across, and they are packed with photoreceptors optimized for detecting the faintest traces of light. Those eyes appear red in certain lighting conditions and blue in others. They can detect bioluminescent flashes and silhouettes across significant distances in water that is otherwise completely dark. The overall effect is an animal whose body is a masterwork of restraint. Everything about it is engineered to use less, consume less, and risk less than any other creature around it. The vampire squid does not conquer its environment through strength. It survives through extraordinary efficiency. Here is the moment where the vampire squid subverts everything you would expect from an animal with its name and appearance. Most cephalopods are active predators. Squids chase fish at speed. Octopuses ambush crabs with explosive force. Even smaller cephalopods hunt actively, pursuing live prey and subduing it. The vampire squid, with its dramatic name and its dark cloak and its enormous eyes, seems like it should be the most intense predator of all of them. It eats dead things. Specifically, it eats what marine biologists call marine snow. Marine snow is a continuous gentle shower of organic particles that drifts downward from the upper layers of the ocean into the deep. It consists of dead plankton, fecal pellets from animals higher in the water column, shed mucus from gelatinous organisms, fragments of discarded Larvacean houses, bits of decaying marine organisms, and microscopic debris of essentially every biological kind. By the time it reaches the depth where the vampire squid lives, this material has been falling for hours or days, and it represents a form of nutrition that almost no other large animal bothers to collect. The vampire squid collects it with its two retractile filaments. These filaments are coated in fine sensory hairs and sticky mucus, and they are extended passively into the water current while the animal hovers. Particles of marine snow adhere to the filament surface as they drift past, and when enough has accumulated, the animal retracts the filament, draws it to its mouth, and wipes the collected material into a food ball. That food ball is then coated in more mucus secreted from the suckers on the arms and consumed. This feeding strategy requires almost zero energy expenditure. The animal does not move to find food. Food moves to the animal, carried by the natural downward drift of organic material through the water column. It is the dietary equivalent of sitting in one place with your hand extended and letting the world deliver your meals. This behavior was confirmed through years of painstaking ROV observation by researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute in California, who watched the animal feed in its natural environment using remotely operated vehicles. What they observed overturned the assumption, held since the animal's discovery in 1903, one that the vampire squid was a predator like its relatives. It is not. It is the deep sea's most patient and passive collector of the ocean's debris. Because the vampire squid lives in a world without sunlight, and because the animals around it in that world produce their own light, it had to develop a relationship with bioluminescence that goes well beyond what most deep-sea creatures manage. The vampire squid's body is covered in specialized cells called photophores, and these cells give it a level of control over its own luminosity that is genuinely extraordinary. Most animals that produce bioluminescence can turn it on or off, and the vampire squid can do significantly more than that. It can modulate the size, the intensity, and the pattern of light produced by its photophores individually. It can create gradients of light across its body, making one area glow brightly while keeping another completely dark. It can pulse the light in sequences or hold it at a steady level. The photophores at the base of its two fins and at the tips of its arms are particularly large and complex, and the degree of fine control the animal exercises over them suggests a level of neurological sophistication that researchers are still working to understand fully. This ability serves a layered purpose. One function is called counter-illumination. At the upper edge of its depth range, the faintest glow of sunlight filtering down from above can allow predators below the vampire squid to see its silhouette against that dim background. By producing its own light on its underside at precisely the right intensity to match the background glow above it, the vampire squid erases its own outline. It becomes, in effect, invisible from below by imitating the light it is silhouetted against. The photophores also serve a second function at greater depths where no background light exists at all. The animal can produce flashes and patterns that function as disorientation tools against any predator that gets close enough to see them. The shifting, pulsing glow of a frightened vampire squid in total darkness is difficult for a predator to track, especially when combined with the erratic swimming behavior the animal produces when it feels threatened. It is a defense system built entirely from light, operated with remarkable precision in a place where light itself is extraordinary. In the oxygen minimum zone, the vampire squid is arguably the most sophisticated light-producing animal in its entire ecosystem. If the light show fails to deter whatever is approaching, the vampire squid still has several more layers of defense to deploy, each one more unusual than the last. The first is a physical transformation called the pineapple posture. When the animal feels seriously threatened, it inverts its 8 arms upward and backward over its own body, folding the webbed cape inside out so that the outer surface of the arms now faces inward and the inner surface faces outward. This makes the animal appear significantly larger than it actually is, and it exposes the spines along its arms called cirri, which look formidable but are in reality entirely harmless. The photophores on the underside of the cape are concealed by the dark pigmentation of the inner surface during this posture, while the glowing tips of the arms are now grouped together far above and away from the animal's actual body. Or any predator that lunges at the light source attacks the wrong part of the animal entirely. If that is still insufficient, the vampire squid can deploy what is perhaps the most dramatic defense in the cephalopod world. Most squids defend themselves with ink, but the vampire squid has no ink sac. Instead, it ejects a cloud of sticky, bioluminescent mucus from the tips of its arms, containing what researchers describe as innumerable orbs of blue light. This cloud persists in the water for nearly 10 minutes, glowing in the darkness long after the animal has slipped away. A predator chasing it through the dark is suddenly surrounded by a constellation of glowing particles and has no clear target to pursue. There is one final detail worth knowing. The arm tips that produce and carry this bioluminescent mucus can be bitten off by a predator without causing the animal lasting harm. The tips regenerate fully. So if something manages to reach it despite the posture and the light cloud, the vampire squid can sacrifice the very tips that cause the distraction and swim away intact. Almost every cephalopod that has ever been studied follows the same basic reproductive pattern. They mate once, they lay their eggs, they die. The entire species trades individual longevity for one concentrated burst of reproduction, and then it is over. Squids, cuttlefish, most octopuses, they are all semilparous, meaning each individual reproduces a single time in its entire life. The vampire squid breaks this rule entirely. So research published on specimens studied at institutes including GeoMar in Germany revealed that female vampire squid store sperm from a male inside a specialized pouch within the mantle for extended periods before fertilizing their eggs. Once she does fertilize them, she may brood those eggs for up to 400 days before they hatch. During this brooding period, in conditions where food is already scarce, she is expending long-term energy protecting a clutch that will not emerge for over a year. That alone is a remarkable investment. But what makes this animal genuinely unique among cephalopods is what happens after those eggs hatch. Rather than dying, the female vampire squid rests. Her body rebuilds a new batch of eggs, and then the process repeats. Researchers analyzing the reproductive tissue of one female vampire squid calculated that she had already completed approximately 38 separate spawning cycles during her life, with enough egg reserves remaining for potentially 65 more. Yet as this means a single female can reproduce potentially over 100 times across her lifetime, which scientists estimate may exceed 8 years. In a cephalopod, 8 years is a long life. Reproducing more than once is revolutionary. The vampire squid's reproductive strategy is so different from all of its relatives that it has prompted researchers to reconsider assumptions about the relationship between metabolic rate, depth, lifespan, and reproduction across the entire deep sea. It breaks the rules even in the area where all its relatives follow the same rule without exception. Let us go back to the name one more time. Vampiroteuthis infernalis, vampire squid from hell. Carl Chun chose that name in 1903 when he pulled the first specimens from the deep and stared at their dark cloaks and enormous red eyes and could not think of anything more fitting. He was not trying to be accurate, he was responding to an impression. But here is what the name actually describes, now that we know what this animal really is. It is a creature that survived every mass extinction event for at least 175 million years by retreating into the most hostile, oxygen-starved, lightless region of the ocean rather than competing on the surface. It eats the ocean's waste. It breathes with blue blood built for suffocation. It defends itself not with force, but with light, illusion, and self-sacrifice. It is the story of an animal that looked at the worst possible environment the ocean had to offer, entered it completely, and then simply refused to leave. That, in the end, is far more impressive than anything its name was ever going to promise. If this video gave you something worth thinking about, drop a comment below and subscribe for more. You will want to see what comes next.